Hi, today we are going to be using the Creative Grids Hexagon Trim Tool. This tool is very handy. It's got 4 different sizes of making your hexagons. We've got a 2-inch, 4-inch, 6-inch, and 8-inch. Today, for our project, we're going to be using the 2-inch strip size. In order to do that then, we're going to cut our fabric strips first off at 2 1/2 inches. And this is going to allow us then to get our 2-inch hexagons cut from it. Okay, we are going to start with our 2 1/2 inch strip. As you see, I'm lining up the lines on my 2-inch hexagon ruler right on the edges of the 2 1/2 inch strip. Simply take your rotary cutter and we're going to cut our first 2 sides of that. Then we're just going to move our strip, and once again this is going to line right up on there. That's lining up just perfectly, and then just carefully cut your other side on that. And there is 2 perfect little hexagons. You're going to get 14 out of each strip, so let's get started. Our next step then is we're going to mark our hexagons to start sewing. This is the method that I found the easiest to do that. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to mark 1/4 inch on all 6 sides of our hexagon here. I'm just using a regular pencil on this. It works just fine. And you want to make sure that those overlap a little bit, because really what we're after is this little intersecting point here that we're going to be sewing on. So we want to make sure that happens on there. Just kind of take your time, go around, and you want to do this on all of your hexagons. Okay, let's set up our machine now to get ready to start sewing our hexagons. It does help if you can shorten your stitch length just a little bit. I'm going down just a couple of clicks to make my stitches just slightly shorter. Now, my thread choice. I like to use a 50 weight thread when I'm doing these. These are just tiny little pieces, so the finer thread helps my seams lay considerably flatter on that. The next thing is a foot on your machine. You want to make sure that if you have an open toe foot, because we need to see where we're sewing on that. So look for an open toe foot with your machine. If you've got just a clear one, that'll work, but this is really the ideal method to use on this. So let's go ahead and hook this up, and we're going to start sewing on that. Got our foot on there. First thing we're going to do is we're going to look on our pattern and kind of see the order of our hexagons. My first 2 ones here, I've got a background one and part of an orange flower petal. So what I need to do is simply line these up, and since these were cut with a template, they're going to be basically all the same size. We've got our sewing lines marked on both sides of this, so that's what we're going to start with. Now if we can kind of get right in here, what I'd like to do is pick your side. Now be a little cautious on there. If you've got one that needs to be directional on that, make sure you're putting that in there the right way. This doesn't matter, so I'm just going to get those lined up. And what I want to do then is I want to come in and I want to drop my needle right on that point. I don't know if you can see that, but it's just right at that intersection point on there. That's where we're going to start. I'm going to put my foot down. Now what I like to do is just kind of hold that, fabric, and it does a couple of stitches in place. If your machine has a stitch, knot stitch on that, that's another great little feature to use. I hit that little knot stitch. This is going to do like 4 stitches, stop, and then I can go back to my regular sewing. What I want you to do is sew right on that line till we get to the end again, and I'm just going to knot stitch that again. That's done. Now if you have the availability with your machine to use a scissor cutter, use that. If you don't have a scissor cutter, no worries. Actually, it works very well. What I do is I just go ahead and lift my foot up, pull my thread out a little bit, and you want to pull these pieces behind you, because what's happening now is that thread, see how that foot has come down on top of your threads there. So that holds those in place, and you're ready to start your next one. When I look here, here's my little stitching line. See, I've stitched just right on that little first line there, and that's our first step on that. When I open that up, This is what that looks like, and we've got a little loose on each end. And that's exactly what we need to move on to our next step. Okay, now we're ready to start sewing our strips together. As you see, each one of our strips contains 7 hexagons in this. Now what we need to look at here is, because we were going for a certain size on this, our block is going to finish at 12 by 24 inches. We needed to measure and get the correct distance on these. Some of these hexagons are going to be a half hexagon when we're done. So we will be sewing them on, but what's going to happen is at the end, we're going to end up trimming that off to get our correct size. So what you really need to watch as you're going down here is whether you're starting with a full hexagon or whether you're going to be starting with a half hexagon. In this case, I'm going to sew rows 2 and 3 together. These are the 2 that I've got right here. So you see, this one's going to start with that half hexagon on top. So that's going to come down half a notch. And the green one on the next row is going to be a full hexagon. So this is going to be our first seam that we're going to get together on this. You see, this is what's going to fit together there, those 2 pieces like that. So let's get that lined up right away. Simply move these over, and what we're going to do is line this up just like this. Those are going to line up because we've got our same shape that we have cut from that, and we've got our sewing line on here. So we're going to take that over to the machine now, and we're going to start sewing. Again, we want to drop our needle right on that intersection, and we're going to sew down to this intersection. When you look at that, now I have not pressed any of these at this point in time. Do not, because that gives us the availability to kind of move that seam to whichever side we need to. So leave that unpressed. Let's go ahead, we're going to line this up, and we're going to sew our first little seam. Follow me down here. We're going to do that. I'm dropping that needle right in that intersection once again. Make sure you've got that lined up, that our edges are equal here, and let's just sew that first seam. I'm holding that just ever so slightly so it takes a couple of extra stitches in place, and just take your time. So when you get there, again, kind of hold that if you want for a second, take a couple of stitches in place, and that kind of gives it a nice little lock in. We'll pull that out, clip that off, and let me show you our first hexagon. Okay, so we have sewn our first seam there. You can see that straight across. When you open that up, you can see those are going to, oh, I sewed that wrong. Okay, so we've sewn our first seam there from edge to edge. Those matched up perfect. Now to get our next seam on here, open that up, it's going to be this one. So what I do then is just go ahead, open this up like this. Now this one is going to kind of fold in half. And what you're doing is basically just stacking those on top. Line this edge up right here again. See, we've got our same shape and our seam lines marked. So now we're going to go, and now we're going to sew this seam from this point to this point. This is where we've sewn those together earlier. So this is going to be quite quick and quite easy. That's lined up. This is folded over in half right there. That keeps that out of the way. So let's stick this under, and we're going to sew our next seam. As you can see, here is our first seam that we sewed from end to end. This is what we just sewn here. From this side to this side, right on the line. We stop right on those points that we were at. See on the back side, again, there was our stitching. So we've sewn across there. When we open this up, this is going to give us our first point on that. And see how nice that lays? That's just going to lay right across there. No pleats, no tucks. We're going to finish it all the way down now. So you can see those are going to line right up. This gives us our stagger right here. So then we'll have a similar stagger when we get down to the bottom, only it's going to be this side that's going to be the longer. So let's get that sewn, and we'll show you what comes next. Okay, we just finished sewing our row down there. We just worked our way down at that. Got a lot of strings here right now, but that's okay. When I open that up, it looks a little wobbly, but believe me, it's going to be just perfect once we press that. Look at our seams here. Everything is just made this perfect little seam. You know, no pleats, just all the way down. So that's how we're going to sew together our little hexagons. We'll take it over to the ironing board and we'll show you how to press that so they lay nice and flat. Okay, I am pressing my little seams right now, and I found that I can just press these and they'll lay all just nice and flat. So just kind of press them up, continue to work your way across like this, and when we get done, we'll flip it over here and we'll show you what that looks like. A little steam, a little starch is always good, but see how nice those are laying down flat? And as we flip it over to that side, there we go. This is how we're going to do our little honeycombs. So as you can see, this is a fun project and it's not at all scary. So let's start cutting our hexagons and make our little bee honey row.